the thing is, I do believe there was talk about these things. I believe if we study history, the Confederates were able to shoot pterodactyls, back in the Civil War, and they spread these things out. Anybody can look it up online.
Google it
They
yourself.
spread these things out, and this is a historical fact. So, they spread this thing out, and it's got a huge winglet. It was a pterodactyl they shot. So, of course, these things have been around. Now, they went extinct, obviously, slowly, but surely. And so,
what I'm saying is Jesus wrote a dinosaur to work. That's history. It's in the Bible. How to Train Your Dragon.
Historical facts.
And if you don't believe it, do your own research. Pull up Google. You'll find the picture, I promise.
Oh my God.
Thank you, John Gleason, Godless engineer, for gifting me this beautiful moment. Y'all remember when they tried to cancel Steven Spielberg for posing with an animatronic triceratops animal rights activist?
Back it up.
Hit it from the back.
Cloaca. Historical facts.
Eat my ass, BP. You're down here bailing on the rest of us because you don't want to process your grief and shame like a normal person by drinking and mistreating strangers.
No, Rick. It is you who must nibble my cloaca, or bird asshole.
Everyone knows what a cloaca is.
back in the Civil War, and they spread these things out. Anybody can look it up online. They spread these things out, and this is a historical fact. So, they spread this thing out, and this has got a huge winglet. It's a pterodactyl they shot. So, of course, these things have been around. Now, they went extinct, obviously, slowly, but surely. And so,
Paul Bunyan was sharing some Funyuns with his pet velociraptor.
Whoa.
Oh, you thought it was an ox? Roll back the clock. Let me knock the socks off. Historical facts.
I didn't cut out. You heard me. Are you a pervert or something? Okay.
What's up, heathens? How y'all doing? I'm the Godless Engineer, and I critically analyze apologist claims to give you the best arguments and information so that you can stand up and use your voice. Today, we are going to be looking at a talk or like a sit-down interview discussion kind of thing with N.T. Wright. N.T. Wright is kind of an old-school apologist, but he's, I guess, most known for saying that Christianity is the impossible faith if Jesus didn't resurrect from the dead. And so he's going to be answering some questions today, specifically about the historicity of the resurrection. Considering that this is Resurrection Month, I thought it would be a good idea to kind of focus on covering the resurrection. So if you want to fuck around and find out why the resurrection is not a historically necessary fact, then please stay tuned. All right, heathens. Well, tonight we've got sort of a full slate. We don't have Brosifas stopping by. I didn't really get a chance to have any fuck around or find outs, but we do have news and we have comments to go over. So I hope that you guys are buckled in and ready for that kind of bullshit. And then after we handle the last week in news, which every single week seems to be like a fucking millennia, but after we handle this week in news, we're going to hit up some comments and interact with people all across the internet. And then we're going to get to N.T. Wright and him trying to justify the resurrection as a historical fact, in which he's going to spread a lot of false information. Whether or not he knows that it's false, I don't know. You would think that an educated guy would know. So I'll leave that up to you. But I normally have, my Today I Learned song that I like to play going into the comments. But, a while ago, Limited Light sent me his Laura Trump's Unlearn kind of song. So I think that we're going to play that.
Woo! That's KC's money.
KC's money. Daniel M says, David says, good night. Thank you so much there, Daniel. I appreciate you.
Hey, just wanted to say you don't have to be a good person to get into heaven. You just gotta suck my dick.
That's right. Limited Light says, oh man, could have sent you buttloads of fuck around and find out. Doocy stepped into Dookie. Yeah, I can imagine that. I just didn't have time to get that together today. I just barely got like the news and the comments together. So I didn't have time to really properly find all the, although maybe I could talk about some fuck around and find out like one thing with Sarah Huckabee Sanders that was kind of funny. But we're going to get to the Today I Learned, and we're going to have Limited Light sing us his Laura Trump unlearned or Today She Didn't Learn stuff. So here we go.
Today I didn't learn. You can stand me up at the gates of hell, but I refuse to learn.
There is something.
Yep. I mean, that's actually really good. Because she does refuse to learn like all the time. All right, so we're gonna be doing news first. I hope that you guys are ready. I've got these are kind of long little rants I'm gonna go on, but you'll understand why maybe. All right, so first up is this jackass, which as you can tell, I didn't have time to like center everything and whatnot, but I'm gonna fix that right now so that you guys can kind of see it there. There we go. Okay, here we go. So RFK Jr. has once again blasted straight through the event horizon of stupid and emerged on the other side in a brand new universe of brainworm eating idiocy. This guy wants us to believe with a straight goddamn face that autism isn't genetic. No, forget the mountains of scientific research, forget the twin studies, forget the genetic markers for autism. I want you to forget all that, erase it out of your fucking minds like the brainworm got to it, okay? No, according to RFK Jr., autism is caused by some mystery toxin that's floating around like it's the goddamn Joker's laughing gas waiting to turn your kid into an extra from a conspiracy documentary. And the best part about this, the absolute, how do you say this on piece de resistance? Of this conspiracy souffle, he says the Department of Health and Human Services.
You have been blessed by Christ. Now go forth and suck my dong.
Oh shit. Daniel M says, I lost my fucking job. I ended up having to resign. Oh goddamn, Daniel. Well, we'll have to have like a member stream or not stream, but like a chat about that. Check in on you. Make sure you're okay, man. So sorry to hear that. So the absolute piece de resistance of this conspiracy souffle, he says that the Department of Health and Human Services, the same government that he thinks is run by like lizard people and big pharma sleeper agents, is going to find this toxin by September. Like it's fucking Easter, and they're gonna go out back and find the autism toxin under a rock next to the Ark of the Covenant, buried next to Jimmy Hoffa. Let me explain something to RFK Jr. real quick, and I'm gonna speak real slow here. So even his mercury-addled brain can process it. If autism was caused by a single goddamn toxin, we would have found it already, you dipshit. You know why? Because scientists, real scientists, mind you, love nothing more than finding new shit. Especially if that's something that could prevent a developmental disorder. But no, Bobby here thinks that we've all just been sitting on our hands and going, golly gee, I wonder if it's lead paint or gluten or the 5G wizard juice. This is not science. This is not medicine. If it were medicine, it would just be fucking called medicine. This is a late stage internet brainworm rot with a dash of Kennedy entitlement sprinkled on top. And every time this guy opens his mouth, a biology textbook somewhere bursts into flames out of sheer embarrassment. And honestly, I think that he is perhaps the worst, period, Health and Human Services Secretary, period, ever, period. It's mind-blowing to think that this guy is pushing that autism is caused by a toxin. And who's gonna, I bet you, mind you, we're gonna fast forward like later on in the year when September comes around and he reveals this magical toxin. How much you want to bet it's gonna be some kind of chemical that's used to like stabilize vaccines or protect like vaccines or allow vaccines to work properly. It's gonna be a chemical that's integral to vaccines. You just wait. I can't wait for this to not age like milk, but age like bourbon here. Meaning that it'll improve as time goes on because RFK Jr. is that much of a dipshit. All right. Well, that's it for dumbass Bobby here, who thinks he's going to find the toxin responsible for autism. And he's also denying, its genetic component. Next up is Donald J. Dipshit. Hold on, something better. Donald J. Dumbass. There you go, Donald Dumbass. So Donald previously, before the November election said, if Kamala wins, you are 3 days away from the start of a 1929 style economic depression. If I win, you are 3 days away from the best jobs, the biggest paychecks, and the brightest economic future the world has ever seen. Fast forward a few months here, and you want to talk about hypocrisy so dense it could collapse into a black hole of bullshit? The tangerine tyrant here, the only man alive who treats global economics like a toddler treats a Monopoly game, loud, confused, and somehow covered in ketchup stains. So Captain Comeover gets it in his head that tariffs are a weapon. Right? He's going to slap tariffs on China like he's Vince McMahon body slamming trade policy. We're going to punish China and hit them where it hurts. And shocker of all shockers, the Chinese, who have been playing the long game since before Europeans figured out how boats work, tariff us right the fuck back. Now, mind you, this reciprocal tariff is coming on the heels of like an economic collapse of global proportions here. I mean, we're talking about day after day after day of losses. We're talking about trillions of dollars, over $6 trillion being wiped from the market in less than a week after his so-called Liberation Day. I guess Liberation Day was some kind of keyword for like fucking melt the American economy straight to the ground, right to the fucking foundation, pretty much. I mean, he basically erased the gains from 2024. That's what eventually happened. But as soon as Trump levied tariffs on China, they levied tariffs right back. And this guy, the Tangerine Tyrant, looks like a kid who just got punched after poking the bear for an hour straight. And he was offended. He got offended. Like, China was supposed to just sit there and go, thank you, sir. May I have another? No, Donnie, that's not how trade wars work. And that's actually how kinks work. Like, if you want to slap somebody and get them to ask for more, invest in that, I guess. But then this orange grifter, this sentient bucket of expired hamburger grease, decides to announce a pause on his precious tariffs. But not just any pause, a 90-day pause, after whispering to every Wall Street ghoul within earshot like he's a goddamn stock market tooth fairy. Psst, hey, tariffs coming back in 90 days. Better buy low, sell high, baby. Congratulations, folks. That's not the art of the deal. That's insider trading with extra cholesterol. Trump turned the global economy into QVC for billionaires. Coming up next, artificially inflated stock prices, now in China tariff edition, but hurry, offer ends in 90 days. If this wasn't real life, I'd assume that it was rejected footage from Veep for being too unrealistic. Now, so Trump melted down the American economy, and then he posted on Truth Social, now's a good time to buy. And everybody that was on the inside of this and knew what he was going to do went ahead and bought stocks. So you see this tiny bump in stocks about 20 to 30 minutes before he actually announces it on Truth Social that he's going to pause it. So Adam Schiff, senator? Yeah, he's a senator, right? Senator Adam Schiff, he's opening an investigation into it to see if it actually is insider trading. It definitely looks like insider trading. And this just goes to show, along with Trump having Charles Schwab in the Oval Office to announce that Charles Schwab made $2.5 billion in that little scheme. So he is literally manipulating the markets to make his friends, or those that want to pay to play, richer. And that's what he's doing. He's shifting what wealth the poor middle class actually have. Well, wealth, I just say any money that they do actually fucking have. He's shifting it from there to the richest 1% of motherfuckers out there who are his friends, or they pay to be his friends. So I guess what I'm trying to say is fuck Donald Trump. Fuck Donald Trump. Fuck Donald Trump. Anyways. All right. That's going to be it for the economic news right there. But next, we've got some church bullshit. So if you would like more information on the atheist or secular news that we're going to be talking about tonight, you can definitely go to friendlyatheist.com. He's got like at least one post a day for atheist news or whatnot. And so definitely go there, check that out, and you won't regret, staying on top of the secular and atheist news in our community. This isn't like a sponsored spot or anything. I just really, truly believe in him at Meta and the effort that he puts in on his blog and everything that he does. So definitely check him out. All right. So here we go again. Churches in America pulling their favorite little magic trick yet again, turning tax-exempt pulpits into full-blown Republican campaign headquarters. And the IRS, the IRS is just standing over there in the corner like a fucking cuck, sitting in the cuck chair, watching the conservatives violate our separation of church and state with a 12-inch dildo. Because everybody wants that image in their head. These pastors aren't even subtle anymore with their cuckoldery. They're not even hinting. They're not even winking. They're not judging. No, these guys, they're not nudging. Sorry, they're not nudging. So no, these guys are just straight up holding GOP pep rallies in God's living room. Hey, everybody! Hey everybody, here's who Jesus wants you to vote for. Brought to you by the same guy who thinks pronouns are demonic. And the IRS, that lumbering, useless referee in this rigged game, which, I mean, to be fair, the IRS has had a lot of major cuts to it, but also those in charge of the IRS, especially during conservative regimes, have regularly turned blind eyes to violations of the separation of church and state and the Johnson Amendment. So, I mean, this is no surprise coming from a conservative institution or a conservative regime of the IRS, but they're also looking to just totally abolish the IRS or some kind of bullshit like that. I don't know what their plans are, but it's definitely not good. Okay. But in any case, the IRS knows that this violates the Johnson Amendment, and they know it. They literally sent over a letter like, hey, we just noticed that you might be breaking federal law by campaigning from the pulpit. Would you care to explain why that's totally fine? And oh yes, I can certainly explain to the IRS why it's not fine. It's because Christianity in America, or wait, hold on, I fucked that up. Oh, I can explain, IRS, why it's totally fine, or at least they perceive it to be totally fine. It's because Christianity in America isn't a religion anymore. At least it doesn't seem to be. It's a fucking political action committee with communion wafers. It's a tax-free cult where the only scripture that matters is render unto Caesar unless Caesar is a Democrat. Then fuck him and his socialist ideologies. We hate the Reds except if you mean the Russians. We love the Ruskies. Please, Putin, put it in our booty. And these churches, they just don't care. Why would they? There's no consequences to it. The IRS has the spine of a wet fucking spaghetti noodle right now. They're not the Internal Revenue Service. They're the internal, really sorry about this service. Gee whiz, sure, would be a shame if you lost that tax exempt status. Just kidding, keep breaking the law. We don't give a fuck about it. Church is telling people exactly who to vote for while dodging taxes is America's version of divine privilege. It's holy racketeering. Jesus didn't flip tables in the temple because they were selling doves. He flipped them because they weren't selling the votes too. So what you end up having here is secular institutions out there, secular charities are too afraid right now to actually even get close to that line because their tax exempt status can be taken away so easily. But churches are regularly able to preach from the pulpit about who you should vote for, who you should not vote for, and how you can't be both Christian and a liberal, or Christian and a Democrat, or anything like that. They can literally say that from the pulpit and there's no fucking problem whatsoever. As long as you're sucking the tangerine giant's little tangerine, you can obviously do whatever in the fuck you want to. Because actual laws don't matter in the United States anymore. They definitely want to integrate religion into the state. They want them to become one. And it's so fucking obvious, especially with Mike Johnson up there, who's got a very ironic name considering that he has his son watching his porn habit. It's just so fucking weird to see our nation start out wanting to separate church and state, building such a solid wall between church and state, only to have the conservatives who constantly preach about how much they care about America and how patriotic they are, but yet they sit there and they piss on the graves of the founding fathers while at the same time saying, oh, but the founding fathers wouldn't want this. They wouldn't want immigrants coming here and doing, well, you just ignore the fact that they were immigrants themselves. And, you know, there's that whole line in Hamilton where it's like, immigrants, we got the job done. But forget all of that kind of shit. It's definitely no immigrants. We are not a melting pot. We are definitely an inbred as fuck nation, just like the European monarchs. I don't know. I went off on a little thing there. My ADHD kind of got to me and I just sort of went off. Anyways, so yeah, that's pretty much it. It seems like the Johnson Amendment's not being enforced, which makes it pretty pointless. And I think the Johnson Amendment will only be enforced on secular and atheist organizations, or at least organizations that don't suck Mango Mussolini's mango. So, I mean, yeah, we're kind of like the nation's kind of fucked. Anyways, that's going to be it for the news today. I hope that you guys hated it. I know that I did. And I guess we could still play this little part going out because this is kind of a fuck around and find out situation for like a bunch of the conservatives and everything. Drink it up. It ain't going to get any better. Up. I thought the foam was going to get me. It's fine. Okay. All right. So that's it for the news. Y'all ready for some comments? I know that I am. Yeah, you ready? All right. Here we go for the comments. We've got first is Robert Tynert, who says, it was you Marxist Democrat scum that left the border open for 4 years that allowed all the unvaxxed, unvetted, illegal trash in carrying it. Okay, for one thing, xenophobia. That's really gross, okay? Like, I don't understand these people that are so xenophobic and portraying people, you know, that are immigrating into our nation as being unvaxxed and unvetted and all this other stuff. This obviously shows that this guy knows literally nothing about the immigration system. Now, I'm not going to sit here and try to, you know, tell you that I know everything about the immigration system because I fucking don't. But I do know that you have to be vetted multiple times through the immigration process. And the fact that immigrants and undocumented persons in this country help generate GDP, a significant amount of GDP for America, it seems to be the better option to initially vet, meaning that you got to have more judges in order to do the vetting. You got to have more resources in order to vet all of the people that are trying to immigrate, and then allowing them to stay here while they go through the immigration process only benefits us. And I don't understand these xenophobic, racist assholes that seem to think, or at least seem to not realize, the contributions that undocumented individuals, as well as documented immigrants, what kind of positive effect they have on our country. It's just so fucking crazy. And then the border wasn't open for 4 years. Now, was it easier to immigrate here from another country? Was it easier to get into the country, stay here, work, and all that other kind of stuff? Yes, but I do think that that was, on the whole, a good thing because of the positive economic effects that it has on our country, and the positive mental health effects that it has on those immigrating. Like, all around, it's just the best solution, in my opinion. Now, we don't have to totally close the border in order to have a functioning immigration system. Trump obviously thinks that that's the only way to have a functioning one, is to totally shut off the border and deport even U.S. citizens if they feel like it. But as far as an open border goes, no, there was not an open border.
You have been blessed by Christ. Now go forth and suck my dong.
Daniel M says, shouldn't that dipshit like unvaccinated people? You would fucking think. You would think that that wouldn't be a problem, but like on the conservative side, it's like sort of split sometimes as to whether or not they want you vaccinated or they don't want you vaccinated. Like, it's just like kind of fucking up in the air. But in any case, interestingly enough, if you compare the year over year of deportations and like active, not active, but what word am I looking for? Encounters. That's the one that I was looking for. The encounters are actually down from, they're up from Biden's time last year, like in his presidency last year compared to this year. Trump has actually deported less people than Biden did in his last year. And I believe encounters were down during Biden's, like, especially nearing the end in December, Biden got encounters down, and Trump took all of the credit for, encounters going down, but they were basically going down, and they continued to go down. So like, he didn't really do anything to help stave off encounters. Although I haven't looked at the most recent numbers, so that could be outdated information. Sirnian says Biden deported more. Yeah, he did. So it's really weird to hear them act like, Trump is so much better on immigration policy than Biden when he's actually doing worse. So, yep, go fuck yourself, Rob. You don't know shit about shit, buddy. Next up is this flat earth dipshit here from our Globe Skepticism. So basically the video is this guy jumping on a trampoline, and he's got objects, and he uses these various objects to demonstrate weightlessness, right? And so he bounces up on the trampoline, and then he lets him go, and he like does the thing where, obviously you get the same effect as if you're orbiting the Earth. Do you know why you get the same effect when you're orbiting the Earth? Because when you're orbiting the Earth, it's like you're in constant free fall. The point at which this guy was taking the video, he was in free fall, thus making it look weightless. So obviously, and like the background moves with the guy, he was obviously shooting on like slow-mo mode or something like that, and then he just speeds it up to where it looks like a normal speed. Like, it's very obvious that this guy was just jumping on a fucking trampoline. You're just in, like, when you're in orbit, you're in constant free fall, and that's why the weightlessness is like it is there, as it is right here. So you're not proving anything. You're just, well, I guess that's not technically not true. You're just proving that you're a dipshit And that's it. Next up is this stable genius, Hula Taffy. Well, his display name's Hula Taffy, but his @ is Corn2112, spelled with a KH. Yep. All right. So Andrew Yang posted, if something goes down 10% and then up 10%, are you back to where you started? No, because the decrease is from a bigger number. And he says, e.g., 10 minus 10, which would be 10 minus 10%, or hold on, 100 minus 10, which is 100 minus 10% of the 100 is 90, right? Well, if you add 10% of the result, the 90 back, you just have 99, right? So take 10% of 100, that's 10. Take 10% of 90, that's 9. You end up with less. So no, Andrew Yang has the correct math here. I'm not exactly sure what he's talking about in this. I feel like it doesn't matter to Hula Taffy's response, but Hula Taffy says 90 plus 10 equals 100. Why are Democrats so stupid? Why can't y'all just do math? 10% of 90 is 10. We all know this, okay? Obviously, Hula Taffy thinks that you're just adding back the original amount that was removed. But that's not what Andrew Yang said, and I don't think that was what the situation was, right? And so, yeah, I really don't think that Hula Taffy can do math, and maybe he needs to go back to remedial math. This is basic shit. My son learned this in I don't know, 3rd grade. When did they learn percentages? I feel like you could do this very easily right here. And Hula Taffy is just fucking failing. Which, honestly, out of the conservative crowd that would say shit like, why are Democrats so stupid? They are always the most ignorant motherfuckers out there. They ended up failing 5th grade a few times before they could move on in school. I really don't understand how some of these people are conscious enough, in the mornings, to put their fucking pants on. Maybe some of them just fucking don't. They just walk out of the house in their goddamn underwear. I don't know. But I would be surprised if that hasn't happened to Hula Taffy at least once. All right. This next one's from the Curious Christian, who says there is no evidence Mary was a child. Well, that's not exactly true. If you're talking strictly and explicitly from the Bible, is there anything that indicates Mary was a child? Not explicitly in the way that it says Mary being of age 14, kind of thing. We don't get that in the Bible, but what we do get are some context clues. She was betrothed to be married. Generally, at this particular point in time, when an Israelite woman was betrothed to be married, she would have been just after puberty or, post-pubescent. And so we're talking between the ages of 11 and 14 is generally when women were married off at this time. And typically in the Israelite community and Jewish communities, they were married off to guys that were 20 to 30 years old. And so this was just the general practice. So there's no evidence Mary was a child. That's not exactly true. If the gospel does relate true information about the fact that there was a Mary, then Mary would have had to have been between the ages of 11 and 14 when she got betrothed to Joseph. When she was visited by the angel would have been right around that same period of time, because Joseph and Mary were not actually married yet. They were just promised to each other, or, I guess the preliminary sales pitch was made to, from Joseph to Mary's father or something like that. I don't know how that fucking sexual slavery goes, but they hadn't consummated yet, I think is what the point was. So they hadn't consummated, so they weren't married yet. And so that means that Mary was between the ages of 11 and 14, depending. There is evidence that Mary was a child, just because of the fact that the most likely conclusion is that she was a child. In order to suggest that she was not a child, meaning that she was, let's say, 18 years or older, you would have to then speculate without evidence that she was that. And that would actually be an outlier in the situation. That would be an outlier in Israelite and Jewish culture. Gesundheit, honey. And so you would actually have to have a substantial amount of evidence in order to suggest an outlier. So the curious Christian, I feel, needs to do a little bit more research into what a logical argument is and what evidence means, because he doesn't seem to know what either of those things are. All right, and then finally, we've got this one. This is actually quite recent, not old. Christian Denoto says, "You can't be a Christian and a liberal at the same time. They contradict." Now, it depends on what you mean by Christian. If you mean by Christian a fundamentalist like Baptist, or at least a fundamentalist in general, then I would say that that would be a true statement, that you can't be a fundamentalist Christian and also a liberal at the same time. Just because those two worldviews contradict so much, there's no way that you can maintain both positions and still be able to adhere to any one position. So I agree on that aspect. If you're talking about just general Christian, meaning just somebody that generally believes in Jesus as the Son of God and all this other stuff, and you lean on the more progressive side where you cherry pick out of the New Testament all the nice and fluffy verses and everything that the progressive Christians represent Jesus as, and they totally ignore all the bad shit that is also in the Bible. And so if you're that form of Christian, then yes, you can be a Christian and a liberal. I would say that liberal Christians end up having to cherry pick and reinterpret the Bible so that it actually isn't as horrible as it is. So there is a little bit of cherry picking there. And if you were to actually adhere to the Bible as it was originally written through the various centuries that it was written in, I think that would be really ridiculous, but also that definitely means that you're not part of a more progressive or liberal worldview. You would definitely be more conservative, more traditional, more fundamentalist. So I do think that those two, fundamentalist and liberal, cannot coincide, but definitely progressive Christians can be and are liberal Christians. So, yeah, this statement has a lot of nuance to it. It has a lot of problems with it. You need to be a little bit more, you need to clarify a little bit more. It seems to stray into no true Scotsman territory, saying that, oh, well, Christians that aren't fundamentalists aren't true Christians, is kind of where I see that conversation going if you were to continue in a conversation with this guy. He's looking to deny any liberal or progressive Christians the fact that they are Christian, despite the fact that they believe in Jesus as God's son, and that the only way that you get to heaven is through belief in Jesus. You know, sucking on that Jesus dick. I feel like you can be a Christian as long as you suck on that Jesus dick, and I gotta tell you, sucking on Jesus dick seems to be pretty liberal. Anyways, that's going to be it for the comments tonight. I hope that you guys enjoyed it. I know I did. I appreciate everybody that's here. Limited Light Syrian, Hellbound Hillbilly, CJS, Philly 3000, Joe Smith. You guys are all great. Sage, Ohio, I see you there. Look at the trees is in the chat. Thank you guys so much for being here and everything. We are going to be getting to the response video now. I hope that you guys are ready for NT Wright and all of his fucking bullshit. Booyah. You didn't play the out-of-tune ukulele. We can solve that. What's up there, Ember? Deviant Outcast? Today we're going to respond to NT Wright's bullshit! He's a dumbass. NT Wright is actually pretty bad. Okay, so let's see. I've got some notes typed up, so I just gotta pull those up.
That's KC's money.
You got some we need a tree emoji. I think that there is a tree emoji. Yeah. Here, I'm putting them in the chat. There's a few. All right. You know, you can download an app that will let you tune that. Hey, it's part of the charm, okay? Part of the charm is that it's out of tune, okay? All right. So N.T. Wright here is going to be giving us his reasons for why the resurrection of Jesus is a fact and not ancient fiction. So I'm interested to hear what his arguments are. I sincerely doubt that I'm going to be persuaded by N.T. Wright, mostly because I've actually read Dr. Richard Carrier's Not the Impossible Faith, which I believe is a direct response to an N.T. Wright thing about Christianity being the impossible faith. And so, yeah, let's see what he's got going on here.
There is something surprising and very bold at the heart of Christianity, the claim that Jesus rose from the dead. Say more about that. Suppose somebody says, look, give me a break.
This guy says, say more. I'm like, say less.
That doesn't happen. I gather at one recent debate on this, someone brought in a nurse who had said, listen, you've been in hospitals, you've seen people die. Have they ever come back? And so on. And so how do you respond to the initial skepticism that someone may have of, how could that possibly be?
Well, the first thing to say is that people in the first century knew just as well as we do that dead people don't come back. If you read from Homer through Socrates to Plato to Pliny, whenever they mention the possibility of resurrection, they say, come on, as you say, give me a break. We know that doesn't. And the early Christians knew that just as well as we do.
So I have to push back immediately here with the early Christians knowing that, being that dead men don't come back. I don't know why the early Christians would have thought that, because like, as far as Christians go, they obviously had Jesus that brought people back as well as came back himself. I mean, there's the Lazarus, story where Jesus literally brings a guy back to life. But all of the Jesus miracles, including his own resurrection, those are predicated on the Old Testament. So the Old Testament has a lot of people being brought back from death, like even from literally a pile of bones. Like there was a guy. Well, no, sorry. The pile of bones is what brought somebody back to life. So there was a guy that was looking to steal, I think it was Elijah or Elisha's bones. I think it was Elijah. No, Elisha. I think it was Elisha's bones. Elisha's bones was buried. Elisha's bones were buried. Some dude dropped dead on top of his bones, and he was brought back to life, and he ran away and shit himself and everything like that. So there's that one. There's also in I believe it's Ezekiel, or yes, I think it's in Ezekiel. It's like Ezekiel 37 or something like that, where it talks about the this land of like bones or something like that, and people were starting to come back to life. Now, obviously that can be interpreted in multitude of ways, but the whole idea of resurrecting dead is something that was known to the Christians or even early Christians, but not just from there, but also from other mystery cults that were around in that area. You had various ones, like the Sumerian and Akkadian gods, Inanna and Dumuzi. Both of those were resurrecting gods. You got Osiris in Egypt. He was a resurrecting god. Adonis in Greek mythology, he was resurrecting. Attis, also resurrecting. Dionysus, resurrecting. Baal, resurrecting. Zalmoxis, Heracles, Melkart, who was Phoenician. So, I mean, you've got all of these gods in this area prior to the first century that were already resurrecting. So considering that the Christians consider Jesus to be a god, even if he wasn't the God, he was still part of that Holy Trinity. Or the Trinity doesn't come till later. I didn't mean to use that kind of terminology to describe this, but like Jesus being on the same divine level as God is what I mean. Them worshiping Jesus as if he was a god and all this other stuff, like resurrecting gods is actually a very common thing. So like they definitely expected their God to resurrect.
is again part of this chronological snobbery thing, and this is a C.S. Lewis line about that. He says, people often imagine that the ancients didn't know the laws of nature, and that we now that we have modern science, we do. And he said, apropos the virgin birth, the reason that Joseph was worried about Mary's pregnancy was not because he didn't know where babies came from, but because he did.
So, yeah, with the exception of special cases like gods. Like, if you're just talking about random Joe Blow out there, yeah, sure, he's not going to resurrect unless a god comes down and resurrects him, okay? So what he's talking about here just simply doesn't track as far as what we understand about first century Christianity, but more importantly, what we understand about ancient Judaism. Ancient Judaism would acknowledge that a god, or at least a prophet of God, could definitely resurrect somebody. And so, like, this wouldn't have been out of place for Jesus to either resurrect himself or to resurrect other people. That's why they made up the stories, because they expected it to happen.
And the same with the resurrection. The disciples were not going around saying, oh, well, isn't that interesting? So people sometimes come back from the dead,
Yes, that's what they would have said. Sometimes people do come back from the dead because God wills them, or God does something, or God sends an agent or a prophet or something like that to resurrect those people. So yes, they would have they would have thought, oh yeah, resurrections happen. This is something that we're taught every fucking time we study the scrolls.
No, that this was not one instance of what now appeared to be a new possible general rule or something. Far from it. Rather, and this is a place where people often get confused. As people say, oh, well, the Jews believed in resurrection, so when Jesus died, they naturally thought he'd come back. Well,
I mean, assuming that Jesus was like a prophet of God, that could have been one interpretation. There's actually a lot of sects of Judaism that we know nothing about. We just know that there were a plethora of sects. So, I mean, yeah, there probably was a sect of Jews out there that thought that the prophet of God was supposed to be resurrected. And the prophet of God that is the Savior. Now, in Judaism, you actually have this two-Savior concept where one Savior dies and then another one comes back to resurrect that Savior. And so the difference between Judaism in this aspect and Christianity is that Christianity just merges those two saviors into one Savior, making it much easier to, I guess, comprehend the one Savior resurrecting himself in order to defeat death and be a Savior for mankind. And so they would have just readily accepted that. That is something that they would have believed. If that's not something that they would have believed, then they wouldn't have made it to fucketh up.
Well, no, some Jews, most Jews of the time, did believe in resurrection, but resurrection, they believed, was something that God would do for all his people at the end of time. Nobody ever imagined it would happen for one person in the middle.
Well, no, that's not exactly true, because, I mean, you've got resurrections happening to the prophets of the Old Testament. Like, they did resurrections, and Jesus actively resurrected Lazarus in that one story. In John, which I know doesn't come to the 2nd century, but they were expecting these things. So yes, single special case resurrections, they definitely would have expected that, because those are things that are normalized in the Jewish scriptures up until that point. So they definitely would have expected, especially a prophet of God, to be able to resurrect. Otherwise, they wouldn't have made the story up, right? They modeled Jesus's miracles off of the prophets' miracles of the Old Testament. And if you want to read more about that, don't just take my word for it. You can read Randall Helm's Gospel Fictions. That's a great book. I actually have a link in my description right now that you can go to. That's if you're interested in mythicism, click this link, get these books. You don't have to get all of them, but those are the books that I would recommend that you read if you want to know more about early Christianity and the origins of Christianity. So they would have totally expected this thing. This was not unexpected. N.T. Wright is trying so hard right now to convince everybody that this was something that was unexpected. And because it was unexpected, that means that they wouldn't make it up. But they totally expected it. Everything that he's saying is exactly opposite of what the evidence shows us. The empirical evidence of the time shows us that they would have been readily accepting of this kind of theology. Otherwise, again, they wouldn't have made it up in the first place there, N.T. Wright. I feel like maybe he should get a refund on his fucking degree.
And you can test this because we know 100 years either side of Jesus, we know of several Jewish resistance movements, messianic movements, rebel movements. Routinely, they ended with the death of the founder. And we have in the histories of Josephus and so on, accounts of what happened next. If the man you followed, who you believe is the king, the new leader, the one God has sent, etc. If he gets killed, you have a choice. Either you give up the movement or you get yourself another leader. And we've got evidence of movements that do one or other of those things.
Right. And Christianity was just one where they elected a new leader. In fact, they, started the whole Pope line and they elected new popes. And so those were the leaders. And as far as early Christianity goes, like under my idea that, Jesus never existed or anything like that, but let's just assume that Jesus existed. He died and everything like that. He didn't actually start the religion. Like he collected people, he taught things, and then people that were in that group later started the religion, right? It was after he died that they started the religion. And so like this religion is decentralized, and we know that it was decentralized, and there was no like governing body for the religion. It was just everybody was teaching whatever in the fuck they wanted to. It's just that there was this core group of people that taught the same thing. They were all coordinated in that kind of aspect. They all had the same theology that they interpreted from the Old Testament and everything. So that allowed them to be this cohesive group and this governing body that eventually turned into what would be, Paul's theology and the Catholic Church and all this other stuff. So essentially, you have Paul that's complaining about other Christians that are going around preaching a different gospel and everything like that. They literally tell us that it's a decentralized movement. If it's a decentralized movement, then his whole argument here makes no sense, that Jesus was the leader of the movement, and when he died, it either had to fizzle out or it had to elect a new leader, right? And Jesus dies, right? And just assuming like that he died, Jesus dies, and then the movement starts as a decentralized movement. Jesus's death has no bearing on whether or not Christianity became a thing. Like the entire origins of Christianity, are not predicated upon Jesus's death. The Christianity would have existed whether or not Jesus had died. Jesus could have faked his death, fucked off to Brazil like fucking Hitler did. Who knows? Apparently, according to the Mormons, he fucked off to America. But in any case, it makes no sense what N.T. Wright is saying here, in that, Christianity was super special in that their leader supposedly died, and instead of fizzling out, they continued on because Jesus resurrected from the dead and continues even to this day to lead the Christian movement.
In no case do we have people going around saying, actually, I think he's been raised from the dead. Because, they were more hard-headed than that. Life is real. We've got to get on with it.
Now, actually, Christianity started because people had visions of Jesus resurrecting from the dead. Now, mind you, assuming that Jesus actually existed and garnered an entire group of people that he ministered to. He was a rabbi, he's a traveling itinerant rabbi, all of the fucking bullshit that historicists always predicate, all of their stuff with. Let's just assume all that's true, right? And Christianity started with Peter and Paul and some other people having hallucinations of Jesus. He appeared to them in visions. So, that's what started Christianity.
And in particular, the idea of choosing another leader, the leader of the church in Jerusalem throughout the next generation was James, who was Jesus' own brother.
I'm not sure when. So the James that eventually became the first pope is not the James, the brother of Jesus. That's a totally different James. And you can actually read a lot of scholarship on this, distinguishing between the James in Galatians 1:19 that's supposedly Jesus' brother and the James of Galatians 2 that was an apostle. Both of them are totally different. And there's a lot of sophisticated scholarship on this, but I definitely suggest looking up the scholarship on it. Don't just take me at my word. But there's a clear indication that the James from Galatians 1 is different from James of Galatians 2. James of Galatians 2 ends up becoming the Pope. And this James, not the brother of Jesus, he was eventually elected, but Paul, being that Paul is our only written testimony about like the theology of early Christianity, he was the first leader of the group, and then it was only shifted outside of it after his death, which happened around 65 or so CE. So like it was only after his death that like other people took over and they started, preaching shit, but they still used Paul as a baseline for early Christian theology. So Paul was the originator. He's the only one that we actually have written sources about. Now, Paul attributes the initial vision to Peter. Peter was the first one that received visions of Jesus. But given that we only have evidence from Paul, like we can't say how much Peter actually contributed to the theology. Now, Paul says in Galatians 2 that he checked his theology against the theology of Peter, James, John, and all of them in Jerusalem, and there was nothing different there. They had nothing to add. So it seems like Paul had the exact same interpretation of the Old Testament as Peter does. So whether Peter was the first one or not, they were all teaching the same shit. So Paul is representative of the leading Christian theology at the very beginning of Christianity, as far as we have evidence for. Not saying that he definitely was. I'm just saying that as the evidence stands right now, he represents our earliest information about the origins of Christianity.
Now, it's very interesting because he was a great leader, a great teacher, a wonderful man of prayer, etc. But nobody ever said that James was the Messiah. If Jesus' body had stayed in the tomb, that would have been the natural thing. Well, it wasn't Jesus, too bad, but here's his brother. He's a great teacher. We revere him. And he was the man who was physically closest to this Jesus who sadly got crucified. So that would have exalted James, but they didn't. They called James the brother of Jesus, the brother of the Messiah. And so as a historian, I am forced to say, when I look at the rise of early Christianity and why it took the shape it did, there are all sorts of things which make me say, I cannot actually explain how Christianity got going as a renewal movement in Judaism in the first century, and why it took this specific shape, unless they really all did believe that Jesus was really bodily raised from the dead.
Yes, I agree that they really did believe that Jesus bodily resurrected from the dead. I do believe that Peter and Paul and the other apostles, early apostles, thought that Jesus had a corporeal body that, had flesh and blood and all this other stuff. I definitely think that they believed that. But just because they believed that doesn't mean that it is actually true. And by Paul's own admission, he never met Jesus while he was alive on earth before he died, supposedly. He only meets Jesus as a vision in which he believes Jesus to have flesh and blood. So, I can perfectly explain the origins of Christianity without an actual death of an itinerant rabbi in the first century. Peter and Paul hallucinated this Jesus due to what they read in the scriptures, and Paul was persecuting the Christians at the time, or, these brothers and sisters of Christ. And because he was persecuting them, he suffered a mental breakdown. He had a psychological break with reality, and he hallucinated this this savior of Christianity and Judaism. And then, after reading the Old Testament and interpreting it in the same ways that Peter and the other apostles that Paul mentions was interpreting it, they came to the conclusion about this new religion that's based off of Judaism. So, it literally doesn't require an actual death of a savior. All it requires is Paul and Peter and the other apostles believing that this Messiah resurrected bodily. That's all that it requires. There's nothing that actually requires it to have actually happened in reality. And that's where N.T. Wright fails to actually justify his primary claim that the resurrection is a historical fact. He fails to actually establish it as something that happened in history instead of just some people believed a weird thing. That's all he ever establishes.
And when you say, but why would they believe that? Could this have been a corporate hallucination or whatever? You can look at those arguments, and I've looked at them and I've written about them, and actually that doesn't work either. They knew about hallucinations. They knew about ghosts. They knew about odd, wacky experiences. There's plenty of literature about that in the ancient world. And they weren't so stupid as just to go wafting off on some idea like that. This was a very definite thing. He really has been raised from the dead. And that was why they did and said what they did.
Right. They just believed that he did those things. And I can believe anything I want to, whether it matches up with reality or it's based on empirical evidence, it doesn't matter. I can believe anything. I can believe that this lamp over here is actually a unicorn. I could believe that if I wanted to. That doesn't mean that it's reality. I could believe that my neighbor resurrected from the dead 3 days ago. That doesn't mean that it's reality. You can believe whatever you want to, but that doesn't mean that it's based in reality. And that's the disconnect that N.T. Wright and other Christian apologists have, is that they fail to actually substantiate why this belief is based on empirical evidence based in reality. They just say, oh, they believed it to be true, therefore it actually did happen. And they fail to think about the crazy guy on the street corner in New York City that's yelling at God. Is he actually yelling at God? Can he actually speak to God? Or does he just believe that he's speaking to God while he's yelling obscenities at the doves? Who the fuck knows? We can't know, but the likelihood of him actually speaking to God while he's cursing out doves on the street seems very unlikely. The probability is very low.
I think one of the most remarkable passages is 1 Corinthians 15, when Paul says, look, a lot of the people here have actually witnessed these events. There are more than 500 people who witnessed Jesus after his supposed death.
Well, no, so that comes from Paul in 1 Corinthians 15. And this 500 witnesses, it would be a lot like me claiming that I was with 500 people and saw Meatloaf play live last night. Meatloaf is dead, and there's no way that he could play a concert in Huntsville, Alabama. And you would be hard-pressed to find 500 people that actually could corroborate what I said. But just because you can't find 500 people in a state of, I don't know how many million here in Alabama, Not a lot, but it is over 1 million. Anyways, you'd be hard pressed to find the 500 people that supposedly saw Meatloaf play live last night. But if you can't find people that went to the Meatloaf concert, does that necessarily mean that Meatloaf didn't play? Just based on that fact alone, you can't say, well, no, he didn't play because I can't find anybody, right? So, the actual empirical fact is that Meatloaf is dead. He's dead. He can't play. It's literally impossible for Meatloaf to play last night unless it's a recording or something like that.
Jesus loves the little children, maybe a little too much.
His name was Robert Paulson. His name was Robert Paulson. I wonder how many people get that in the chat. Anyways, I feel like this is just a failure on basic concepts of evidence and how evidence is used to support your primary conclusion. Because just because Paul says that there are 500 people that saw the risen Jesus doesn't mean that 500 people actually did see the risen Jesus, right? But not only that, it's only them seeing the risen Jesus. So this is post-resurrection Jesus. It's not that they saw 500 people saw Jesus resurrect, right? That's obviously not what was meant. So what they're essentially, whenever you hear this claim, 500 people saw Jesus resurrect from the dead, you should literally think about 500 people claiming that they saw a ghost. And in their own minds, they have this idea of what the ghost looked like and what the ghost says to them and everything like that. Like they all have their own ideas of what that ghost looks like. And so you're going to get different descriptions of the ghost. But in Paul, we don't even have that. All we have is Paul laying out a bare-ass claim that 500 people saw the resurrected Jesus. Oh, 500 people saw a ghost? Okay, good for fucking you, I guess. Might you have actually been able to record something substantial? No, you didn't. Seems like maybe I shouldn't fucking believe that. But Christians are going to readily accept it because they don't understand how evidence is supposed to work.
And so go talk to them. Some of them have died, but look, a lot of people have, and this was close enough in time that you could still find these people.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The passage there in Paul's letters, written probably in 52-3 AD, so roughly 20 years after Jesus' death and resurrection. And Paul is saying, as you say, more than 500, and most of them are still around. And the implication is, go and ask them.
How are you supposed to go and ask them? Like, just like I laid out before with Meatloaf or Robert Paulson, playing a musical concert and me saying 500 people that I know, attended it. I task you with going and trying to find 500 people. You won't be able to find them because it didn't happen, but try to find 500 people, right? And just because you can't find them, does that mean that nobody went? Does that mean, unless you ask everybody in the goddamn world if they went and saw Meatloaf play in Huntsville, Alabama on fucking April 10th, right? Unless you asked everybody in the fucking world that question and got all of the people there, could you actually say that nobody attended that event because it didn't happen? I don't think that that's how logic works. I don't think that's how evidence works. I think that they're totally misunderstanding how evidence is supposed to work. Now, transfer that to the fucking 1st century AD when this supposedly happened, right? Go and try to find the 500 people. If you can't find them, does that mean it didn't happen? Because I can guarantee you it's much harder to find 500 or even one person that would have said that they were part of that 500 at that time than it is now to find somebody.
But there's another fascinating thing in that same passage, which is kind of interesting negative evidence, because what he's doing there is quoting an official church tradition, which goes like this, that the Messiah...
Well, no. So he's not... I mean, I guess an official church... that's a little bit of a weird way to put it. An official church tradition? No, the church didn't come until much later. Like, the church wasn't around in Paul's day. The church, meaning the Catholic Church, came much later. Now, Christian tradition? Sure, it's Christian tradition that he's reciting there, and that he's about to recite to us. But I feel like it's a little weird trying to specify that it's church tradition when it's really not church tradition. It's just Christian tradition. Like, Paul definitely got it from somebody else. And there's a pretty good argument to be made that the 500 witnesses is actually an interpolation that turns over the Pentateuch, not Pentateuch, over the Pentecost to 500 people saw him. There's like a minor spelling correction that commonly happens in Greek that turns it from one to the other. But let's just assume that it originally said the 500, right? That's fine. It's not the point of what I'm trying to say here. What I'm trying to say is that this tradition is just that. tradition. Christian tradition, church tradition, it really doesn't matter. Paul is just reciting something that he's heard. It doesn't actually substantiate it with actual historical fact.
Died for our sins in accordance with the scriptures, that he was buried, he was raised on the third day according to the scriptures, and was seen by. And then there's a list of...
Right, there's a list, but notice how he changed up in the middle of that what he was saying. So at first he said in accordance with the scriptures, which is typically how apologists read that line now. But if you actually go back and you look at the actual Greek that Paul used, he says according to the scriptures. So Jesus died according to the scriptures. Jesus was then buried and resurrected according to the scriptures. And he corrects himself in the second pass there, but he fucked up on the first pass, right? So the only way that Paul knows that Jesus actually resurrected from the dead is because it's in the scriptures. He read it and interpreted it from the scriptures, the Jewish scriptures. So he doesn't actually know about Jesus resurrecting from the dead. He just read it in the Old Testament.
People that he was seen by. And he was seen by Peter, by James, by all the apostles, by 500 at once, and last of all, Paul says, by me. And anyone who knows the early Christian stories, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, will say, something's odd about this. Because in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and John, the first people to see the risen Jesus are the women.
Right. And there's no problem with that whatsoever. Women finding the tomb is actually expected. There's no problem with women finding the tomb or relaying it. In fact, later authors, I guess maybe having heard some pushback about women finding the tomb from people outside of the faith or something like that, they actually worked in a response to that, in that the women found the tomb, went and told the disciples, and the disciples didn't believe them, and so they went to the tomb just to double check on the women's work. Like, what the fuck? But it's very obviously that's something that's worked in much later. And so it's in response to maybe criticism from outside of the faith that people were getting, but Jews definitely respected women at least enough in this particular context to, trust them with these things. He may bring up like the fact that women weren't allowed in court or something like that, but it's not that women's testimony wasn't trusted in court, because women, Jewish women testified in court all the time. Their testimonies were read off in court, and sometimes they were even able to participate in court by being, witnesses and all this other stuff. So there was obviously, and this is all found in Josephus, by the way. But so obviously there was no problem with Jewish women being in court. It was just kind of like at that time they had a very rigid sort of social idea of like where women deserve to be, and it's like women don't deserve to be in court. Like it was unseemly for them to be in court. Obviously they were of the traditional idea of they should be barefoot and pregnant and in the kitchen kind of thing. So that's where they thought that women were supposed to be. So if a woman had to appear in court, it was kind of like an outlier kind of thing.
Now, what's happened is that in the official church tradition, already the women have been airbrushed out of the account, because the early church will have known that women were not regarded as credible witnesses in a law court. And
I guess what he's talking about here is the fact that Paul and them don't mention the women finding the tomb, but he just sort of does a retcon here about why Paul doesn't mention them, in that Paul and the other apostles, like they were really embarrassed that women found the empty tomb first. Never mind the fact that Jesus in the Gospels say the least shall be first, and women being considered least amongst them in the society and in the group of apostles. Them being the first to find them is very powerful and poetic sort of storytelling mechanism there. It totally is in line with the themes of the Gospels. So women finding the tomb is perfectly in line with what everything Jesus taught and the entire story of the Gospels up until that point. So I think that he's retconning here why Paul doesn't mention the women, but I think that the better explanation is that there just were no women in the first place, and that the absence of women in Paul's theology and other early Christian theologies, the absence of women is perfectly explained by the fact that women just simply didn't find the tomb first, and that there was no tomb to find. Like, that's perfectly in line. It's simpler. It has less ad hoc stipulations put onto it. So it seems to be a stronger hypothesis than the retcon that he's trying to convince us of.
Already we have early evidence that people were sneering and saying, this is just a few hysterical women in the half-light of an early morning. You're not going to believe that, are you? And so already by the early 50s, the official tradition has lost sight of them. But in all four Gospels, and they're quite separate accounts, they're not verbally that similar, even when they're talking about the same thing, the women are front and center. And this is the point that I'm making.
Okay, before he gets to the point that he's making, he's trying to suggest that women, in reality, women find the tomb first, and then the Christian community is embarrassed by this fact, so they totally erase them, for a couple of decades. But then when the Gospels start to be written, all of a sudden they're catapulted to the forefront again, as if there was nothing to be ashamed of whatsoever. Yeah. That makes the kind of sense that doesn't. They're N.T. Wright. I mean, if they were totally erased from the narrative, why would they pop back up on the other fucking side of it right here? That makes no goddamn sense, you dipshit. I'm a better biblical scholar than this asshole, honey.
You would never, ever, ever have made that up. Either these stories go right back to the beginning, or they are complete crazy fantasies by people later on who are deliberately shooting themselves in the foot in terms of the credibility of the argument.
Yeah, well, not shooting themselves in the foot, because I think that as far as how the Gospels are set up, it necessitates the women finding the tomb empty. So, like, it would have been weird for them not to find the tomb empty, like the women. Like, for the men to find the tomb empty, that would have been weird and contrary to the major themes of the Gospels. So, like, the women finding the tomb empty is a necessity that's brought on by the teachings of Jesus. So, like, yeah, we totally expect that. It would totally throw the story off for them not to be the first ones to find the tomb. But I definitely think that they were crazy fever dreams that were thought up by later Christians because they wanted to have these miracle and magical stories about Jesus, but they just didn't have any. So they copied the Old Testament and created new stories for Jesus, and boom, Bob's your uncle, fucking Gospels.
So that 1 Corinthians 15 is important, but it's important partly as a sort of negative witness, throwing into relief the extraordinary fact that we have these four separate accounts in which the women are the first to see him.
No, a negative witness? It doesn't make sense for the women to be at the forefront of all this, to be as important to the story as they are, for them to get erased out of the narrative for 20, 30 years, 40 years at least, and then them pop back up into it. Like 40 years, like how, like if you totally ignore that they found the tomb first for 40 years, you think all of a sudden people are going to be like, oh yeah, that bitch Mary found it first. Fuck, I guess I got to put that in there. And it just so happens to coincide with what Jesus said. I mean, obviously, N.T. Wright and other dipshits like him are going to retcon that and to be like, yeah, because Jesus was fucking Son of God. He knew what was going to happen. I don't know. This was not convincing to me, but I am interested in knowing whether or not it was convincing to you. Do you find N.T. Wright's arguments convincing at all? I mean, I sure as hell don't, but I would love to know what you guys thought about it. Definitely leave me those comments either in the live chat right now or later on after the show actually posts and everything. We do have one member comment. Let's see. Hold on, I'm just getting that set up so I can go and read it. Thank you guys so much for joining me tonight. Again, I wasn't impressed by N.T. Wright's arguments. I found that he was totally retconning and twisting the information in order to support his final conclusion that the resurrection of Jesus is actually a historical event. We don't have empirical evidence to suggest this, and the only way that apologists can actually come to that conclusion is if they totally twist the idea of what evidence is and what logic is in order to support their conclusion. And N.T. Wright did all of those things tonight. It's not convincing, and I don't think that you should be convinced. But I do want to hear what you have to say, so leave those comments down below. And while you're down there, why don't you smash that like button and subscribe if you like this kind of content. Don't forget to stand up and use your voice. Bye, heathens. But don't go, because we have the Skeptic Mafia comment to go over. Boom. Thank you so much there, Mark Fernkoff. Appreciate you. Mark says, well, that was a boring video. Oh, there was a lot wrong. Paul was reciting a creed. Of course the stories have the women finding the empty tomb, because the women were the ones who dealt with the tombs. It was women's work. It wouldn't make sense if there was men checking on the tomb. How old is criterion of embarrassment bullshit is exhausting. I apologize for any grammatical or syntactical errors, because I am driving and using talk to text to type. This, I will definitely be watching the live stream tonight with Goddess Candy. I'm pretty sure there is no Toast to Toast AM tonight, sadly. However, in just a few short hours, we have a brand new spanking episode, the greatest show ever, Doctor Who. Celebrate good times and woohoo, yay! New episode drops at the ridiculous time of 2 a.m. Lovely. We will still be awake. Who knows? Will I pass out before the end? Before that, and end up waking up my girlfriend in an ungodly hour to watch the new episode? Probably. An ungodly hour. Anyways, and as always, I love and worship the gorgeous goddess Candy Black. Looking forward to the stream tonight. Got to get back to DoorDashing now. Later, heathens. Thank you so much there, Mark. I appreciate you. All right. Let's see. Okay. Well, that's going to be it for our show tonight. I hope that you guys enjoyed it. I know I did. Kind of a short live stream tonight. I may try to do a game stream tomorrow. I'm playing through the Devil May Cry series because my son is totally obsessed with it, and I watched the new Devil May Cry anime on Netflix, and I gotta say I'm pretty hooked. I hope maybe I can play a little bit tonight, maybe here in a little bit. Who knows? But in any case, I guess I will see you heathens later. I got some fresh content that's coming out next week. No more, well, not no more, but it'll be a short reprieve from the line clips as well as my TikTok stuff. So definitely check that out. And I guess, see, I wanted to comment on this vid, but this vid left me speechless. Thank you so much there, Hellbound Hillbilly. I appreciate you, bud. I appreciate everybody in the chat. Skeptic Haven clips. Yes. Ember. I've been putting Skeptic Haven on the channel too. Brentley, one of Brentley's clips actually went, pretty big for my channel. Dr. Osiris has to rewind now. All right. Well, that's going to be it for me tonight. I hope you guys have a lovely night. I am going to go and, I guess maybe get caught up on some TV shows or something like that. Spend time with the lovely KC over there. And I guess we will see you guys, next week. I will be on Skep Talk on Monday. I don't know who I've got as my co-host just yet, but I am trying to find people, find somebody to come on with me. I'm hoping that I can get David Fitzgerald on. I've got a question out to him to see if he can, but I'm looking, I'm trying to get somebody on there with me. But in any case, y'all have a great night. I will see you guys later. Don't forget to stand up, use your voice, and all that kind of good shit. Bye, heathens.